Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Congressman David Cicilline from Rhode Island, and I'm proud to serve along with Sherry Bustos of Illinois and Hakeem Jeffries of New York as co-chairs of the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee. Last July, Democrats launched a bold economic agenda focused on better jobs, better wages for a better future. Central to that plan is a commitment to create millions of good-paying jobs by rebuilding our country. We're here today to announce a better deal to rebuild America. The Democratic plan to directly invest $1 trillion to rebuild our nation's crumbling infrastructure and create more than 10 million good-paying jobs. In the 20th century, America's ingenuity and serious commitment to have the best infrastructure imaginable helped propel our economy, created good jobs, and made our infrastructure the envy of the world. Today, that's no longer the case. Our infrastructure now ranks behind countries like Singapore and the United Arab Emirates, according to the World Economic Forum. And in a recent report by the American Society of Civil Engineers, 1 out of every 5 miles of highway pavement in our country is in poor condition. An estimated 56,000 of America's bridges are structurally deficient. But the American people don't need these reports to tell them what they already know about the conditions of our roads, bridges, rail systems, schools, and airports. They experience it every day, stuck in traffic, delayed at airports, disrupted in their rail travel, paying high energy costs, worrying about unsafe water, and their kids being forced to be in schools that are old, crumbling, and even unsafe. And that's why today, Democrats are announcing a bold, comprehensive plan to address this urgent issue and to make it a national priority. The deteriorating condition of our nation's infrastructure is impeding our opportunities for economic growth, raising costs on families, and even creating unsafe conditions for some Americans. And the federal government is a necessary partner in this effort to rebuild our country. It's not enough to punt this to the private sector, as the president wants. Rebuilding our country will require a serious, smart investment of real federal resources to get this work done. And a better deal to rebuild America means specifically repairing roads and bridges to reduce bottlenecks, traffic, and problems that not only make people late for work, but also slow the flow of commerce. Building a modern and efficient aviation system so Americans arrive at their final destination safely and on time. Ensuring our passenger railroads and high-speed rail systems are more convenient and safer for all passengers and have less service disruptions. Delivering cheaper energy prices for consumers and reducing the number of power failures by improving and modernizing our aging energy infrastructure so that it's secure, efficient, and resilient. Protecting public health, especially for the most vulnerable Americans, by ensuring every community has access to safe, clean water. Rebuilding and modernizing our public schools so every child in this country has the opportunity to be in a safe, healthy, and modern learning environment. And bridging the rural-urban divide when it comes to high-speed broadband so that we can unlock the economic potential of every community and all rural areas can attract new employers, improve healthcare outcomes, and help students succeed. And it's achieving all of these objectives while maintaining critical worker protections, safeguarding our air and water, and investing in stronger, more resilient infrastructure to withstand rising sea levels and a changing climate. And I want to reiterate, this is a serious, realistic plan that reflects years of work by 6 congressional committees and key stakeholders, and all of the key ranking members have been part of this process. I'll end by reminding people that a better deal to rebuild America is 5 times the size of the commitment that President Trump will propose next week. And the American people deserve a real plan to rebuild our country, and that's what we're committed to delivering. And I'm delighted now to ask the ranking member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, Congressman Peter DeFazio of Oregon, to come forward and say something.
Thanks, David. Well, the Republicans lack a sense of history in terms of dealing with our infrastructure. What they want to do is devolve the obligation to build a national and coordinated transportation system to the states and the cities. Now, they forget history. This is a photograph from Life magazine. This is 1956. This is the brand new Kansas Turnpike. Now, you see this odd black area here. That's Amos Schweitzer's farm field. This happens to be the Oklahoma border. When Kansas started their project, Oklahoma said, oh, yeah, we'll build it too. And then they said, God, we're sorry, we've got some economic problems here. We can't build it. So for several years, they built a big wooden barrier here. People crashed through it. Amos had to tow the people out of his field. I mean, this went on for 3 years until Dwight David Eisenhower, a Republican, joined with the Congress and said, no, we're going to have a funded, by a user fee, a funded national transportation network. And that is what we've been doing for some 70 years. Now, they're breaking faith with that. Congress has broken faith since they took over Congress. We have not increased the user fee since 1993, when Bill Clinton was president of the United States and Democrats controlled the Congress. We were about $80 billion short when we passed the last transportation bill, which was status quo funding. They borrowed $80 billion, or made up, pretended that they had pay-fors. And now, out of this White House, they're saying, well, we're going to come up with $200 million by probably by cutting Amtrak and transit spending. I said, well, you're forgetting history again. John Mica, when he chaired the Transportation Committee, said, we're going to defund Amtrak and we're going to kill off these transit programs. He got his head handed to him. This administration will too, with this fake plan. This is a fake infrastructure plan as proposed. I guess the real elements of it are they do want to push privatization and profit for their friends. They say, we just can't find the money to do this. So the states, the cities, they'll have to pony up. And don't worry, private capital will fill in this gap. So it went from $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion in the State of the Union, but they don't even have the $200 billion they're talking about as a down payment. So we have a concrete plan. We want to move forward. The jobs that are created are not just, people say to me, well, Congressman, I don't work in construction. I say it's not just construction jobs. It's design. It's engineering. It's small business, small minority, women-owned businesses. It's manufacturing. It's actually high tech, because we have a $100 billion backlog to bring our transit systems up to a state of good repair, let alone building out new transit systems to give people more options to get out of their cars stuck in traffic. Those are often now high-tech jobs and manufacturing jobs. And we have the strongest Buy America requirements of any part of the federal government, much stronger than the Pentagon. The multiplier effect is phenomenal. This is what we need to do to put America back to work, get America moving again, and make us more competitive in the world economy. Oh. Frank Pallone.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Peter. But I really want to follow up on what Peter said. I think Peter's pointing out that, the problem with the Republicans and the president right now is they're just too negative. They don't think the federal government can do anything. You know that we have had our issues conference. We're in the middle of it as we're here. And I think what's been coming out of that issues conference is that Democrats feel very optimistic about the future and are thinking about the future. Those of you who listened in the media to Vice President Biden's speech yesterday, he talked about how optimistic he was about the future. And I think that's what we believe as Democrats. The federal government can make a difference, and we can make a difference for the economy by investing in infrastructure. Investing in infrastructure pays back so many times in terms of jobs, the economic engine, and that's what this is all about. But I wanted to just talk specifically about the energy and commerce jurisdiction, because Peter, of course, is stressing transportation, but infrastructure involves a lot of other things. We in Energy and Commerce actually put forward a proposal early last year that included broadband and energy efficiency and a whole bunch of things, safe drinking water, brownfields. And the bottom line was that we feel strongly that this is an important part of the infrastructure needs, an important part of the investment in the future. And I just want to thank our message people, Sherry and David and Hakeem, because that's incorporated essentially in the better deal. The one thing I really wanted to stress, though, was broadband, because I think that high-speed broadband connection is an essential part of life and so important to Americans if they're looking for a job, or if they're looking to better themselves with education, whatever it happens to be. And we know we have this rural-urban divide. We know that there are many people in urban areas, many people in rural areas who are not connected. The figures say right now that more than 10 million urban Americans and 23 million rural Americans lack access to broadband networks. And we want to unlock these communities so that they have that access. So I'm stressing mainly an investment in broadband, maybe something like $40–50 billion investment in broadband, which I think would bridge this rural-urban divide. But I did want to mention also a safe drinking water component, also within energy and commerce jurisdiction. We know that Flint highlighted the problem with safe drinking water and the need to upgrade and expand the infrastructure, not just in Flint, but all over the country, including New Jersey, my home state. And finally, energy. We can do so much more in terms of energy efficiency, putting emphasis on renewables. This relates to the climate debate, obviously, but it also relates to jobs, because energy efficiency really means not only that you create more jobs in actual construction, but also you bring costs down, because more efficient energy ultimately leads to lower costs for the consumer. So these things are all good. They all reinforce each other in terms of improving the economy and creating jobs and making it possible to bridge that urban-rural divide with regard to broadband. And next, for the education component, I want to introduce Bobby Scott, the ranking member.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Frank. When you talk about infrastructure, you shouldn't forget our public schools. Our public schools are in disrepair and are old. Median age of public schools right now is about 40 years. In 2014, the Department of Education estimated that it would cost almost $200 billion to bring all of our public schools up to good condition. And we know that too many public schools lack access to sufficient high-speed digital infrastructure needed to support 21st century learning. That's why we've included in our bill the Rebuild America Schools Act, which will support a better deal for an economic agenda, and is included because it would invest $100 billion to address the critical physical and digital infrastructure needs in our schools and create almost 2 million jobs, many more jobs for the $100 billion than we expect out of the $1.5 trillion in the recent tax cuts. And those jobs will be good-paying jobs because they'll be protected by Davis-Bacon, making sure that they'll pay the prevailing wage and not put downward pressure on wages. We also need, the bill also creates an extensive national database on the conditions of our public school facilities. Currently, no database exists, but if we can have a database, we would know where the problems are and where to invest our money. And so we have legislation that will focus on our schools, that will improve education and create jobs. What could be better? And we now call on Earl Blumenauer, who is an expert on green infrastructure. Mr. Blumenauer.
Thank you, Bobby. Let me just say a word about green infrastructure from the outset. Speaker Pelosi and President Obama, in the midst of the near economic collapse, fashioned a Recovery Act, had almost $1 trillion in debt, and it created hundreds of thousands of family wage jobs, dealt with infrastructure, broadband, roads and bridges, research. I serve on the Ways and Means Committee. We just passed $1.5 trillion with zero investment in the future of our infrastructure and those other priorities. One of the priorities we need to invest in deals with green infrastructure. And what we've seen with my friends on the Ways and Means Committee, their gesture for a clean energy future in the tax program they had in the House was to gut the agreement that we reached with wind energy, putting at risk billions of dollars of wind energy that was already underway. They are not dealing with the partnerships with local communities that need to deal with resilience. We see on an ongoing basis the cost of not making that infrastructure. Look at the extra costs we have recovering from the devastating hurricanes, for instance. This is let alone dealing with climate change. Our military, and Bobby Scott can talk about that in terms of his district. Rising sea levels, the challenges of the really desperate future extreme weather events, puts our military facilities at risk. The Department of Defense is willing to be a partner with local communities and with Congress, And unfortunately, this administration and my Republican colleagues have turned their back on it. This is a fool's errand. Our proposals will deal with strengthening those partnerships with local communities, with the military, to be able to get maximum benefit out of that. That's going to make a difference in the long run, but also in day-to-day quality of life. And Elizabeth Esty.
Thank you, Earl. And as vice-ranking member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, where we've been working for a long time to try to get this addressed, I can tell you several things. Number one, and my father and grandfather were civil engineers. I grew up on job sites. You cannot build a 21st century economy on a mid-20th century infrastructure. It was the investments in the 50s and 60s and 70s that transformed America. We have that opportunity to do that again. We have that opportunity, not only in need, but I think we want to look at the opportunity, the upside that we get. With infrastructure and infostructure, broadband and a resilient, cyber-secure, green grid everywhere. And that will transform America, whether you live in Northwest Connecticut in places where currently you don't get cell phone coverage or broadband in my district, or you live in Ohio, or wherever you live in this great country. To participate in the economy, you need to have access to internet and to a grid. And you need to be able to get there on roads. And we've let that slide. Now, I work with Republicans and Democrats on the committee. There is no DRR after a pothole. The time has stopped for duct tape and baling wire, which is what we've been doing right now. One of the major intersections in my district, I-84, the infamous Mixmaster, you walk underneath it and you can look up through the decking. You can see straight up. The rebar is rusted. It is dangerous, it is wrong, and we can fix it. So the time is now. Republicans know that. And the 2016 election. The 2016 election was about jobs. What was at the top of the list? The president promised infrastructure. Well, here it is, a year later. And it went from $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion in less than a week, because I had been at the White House the week before and it had been $1 trillion and suddenly became $1.5 trillion, but with no new money. If Wall Street has plenty of cash to put into these projects, that has not been the problem. The problem has been leadership out of Congress. Fix the basics. Get with the program. Rebuild those bridges, those roads, those water systems. Make it safe to turn on your tap, safe to drive down the road. Make sure your kids have a good school to go to and they're getting the skills they need. And make sure no matter where you live in this great country, you can participate, you can compete, you have the opportunity to build the American dream. Congress has been falling down on its job. The White House has too. We have a chance to move forward, and the time is now. There's no time like right now to step up to the plate, to work together and get this done. Put people back to work now, make sure they can go to work and get home tomorrow. Thanks very much, and I think we're on to Leader Pelosi, who she has the endurance and resilience we need for this country. And so on to human investment and infrastructure. Leader Pelosi.
Thank you. Thank you, Congresswoman Esty, for your kind remarks, more importantly, for your deep knowledge of this subject and your great leadership on it. I'm very proud to stand here with our colleagues who have worked so hard on this issue over time and now as part of the Better Deal. When we announced the Better Deal with the Senate, with Chuck Schumer and others, we went to Virginia and we talked about infrastructure being part of it. Today, under the leadership of our three co-chairs on communication who developed the Better Deal, David Cicilline, Congresswoman Cheri Bustos, and Hakeem Jeffries, working with the committees of jurisdiction, we have a comprehensive proposal that is transformational for America and what it proposes. What's so exciting about it is it directly addresses the needs of the American people as it thinks very big about how we go today as we go forward. The president talks a big act, but then he proposes a small bill, a small act of Congress. So we have to make sure that we take this message of greatness to the American people. Now, just in my own, across the country, if people take surveys of what bothers people, do you know what one of the issues that looms large is? Traffic. Traffic. It's a quality of life issue. A ride to pick up your children at school or something that should take 15 minutes can take a half an hour, 45 minutes. This doesn't have to be. As has been said, the American Society of Civil Engineers has defined our deficit in infrastructure in the trillions of dollars. Trillions of dollars. So when the president proposes a $200 billion proposal over 10 years, $20 billion a year, what could he be thinking? Mr. DeFazio, our ranking member on transportation, mentioned President Eisenhower. When President Eisenhower proposed the interstate highway system, it was a national defense issue, connecting America, connecting America. As a matter of fact, Al Gore's father was the author of the bill in the Senate at the time. In any case, this is about our national security. It's about job creation. What, 16 million jobs will spring from this proposal. It's about quality of life for the American people, the time they spend in their cars, what it means to the resultant air pollution and the rest from the people being in their cars, what mass transit opportunities will get them out of their cars, but even when they have to be in their cars, to have them go from place to place in a much more reasonable and expeditious time. It's about it's about commerce, moving product to market, especially if it's perishable. Time means everything in that regard. It is about issues that relate to being part of the economy of the future in terms of infrastructure. Again, another health issue in addition to clean air, clean water. Some of our water systems are over 100 years old, made of brick and wood. Have a drink of water from that. So this is essential. It is the need is well documented by the American Society of Civil Engineers. The proposals in the past, way past, I mean, before they were obstructionist to President Obama, this has always been bipartisan. We've always worked in a bipartisan way about this. So it fits comfortably into what our bigger picture of the better deal. It's about build, build, build. Build the infrastructure of America all over the country in a smart way. Build it in a way that is about the future in terms of conserving energy and keeping us competitive internationally as we develop the technologies to do that. It's about build, build, build. When you build all over, you bring personnel into those areas to build, or you draw upon the community to build. But nonetheless, those people need services. So build the human infrastructure as you do this. That part of that is the school system and the rest, but also invest in the education of the talent we need to do all of this. And build, the third build, is about democracy, to protect our democracy. And that talks to the fact that we cannot have a proposal, as the Republicans have put forth, as the president, by the way, has put forth, that is about the private sector sapping the resources. We're going to underwrite and give them a break for building something that they will then charge tolls for. American people pay twice. No, we're not going to that place. So taking that money, private profit motive out. Now, public-private partnerships we're receptive to, but not when the goal of the bill is to transfer the taxpayer dollar to the private sector, rejecting a plan that truly invests. Now, this is something that will bring revenue back to the Treasury. Invest, create jobs, pay taxes, increase what comes into the Treasury, and reduces the deficit. So again, I thank our co-chairs of our Communications Committee and Policy Committee, and, as well as all of the committees of jurisdiction. This is very thoughtful, very specific, and very bipartisan, and obviously very transparent as well. So we look forward to this debate. But what a disappointment what the president put forth. I would just characterize it as something that privatizes our our roads, air traffic control, and essential infrastructure, creates more costly tolls for commuters, and shifts the burdens onto cities and states' budget, which is a problem, but is also not smart in terms of wanting to have a national proposal where we are connected, which was the intention of President Eisenhower when he said it was in our national security issue for us to be nationally connected. With that, I'm sure my colleagues will be happy to answer any questions you may have on this subject. Yes, ma'am.
Madam Leader, did you get any commitment from Speaker Ryan along the lines that you were seeking yesterday? If not, will you vote against the bill and whip against it?
Excuse me, I'm happy to get to that subject, but on this subject here, because this is very important to our economy, to our environment, to our future when we talk about broadband and the rest of that, because so many times that people see that as their path to the jobs for the 21st century. Yes?
Well, considering that the budget deal has money for transportation, can you talk about that in the context of what you guys are doing?
Well, I can, but again, this is a very major proposal of our caucus. And again, I'm happy to answer any of those questions, and I will more fully. But we have tremendous intellectual resources here who have worked on these issues, as you have seen, made brief presentations. We can make them longer, you know that. But
Can I address the budget provisions? There's an ostensible $20 billion for infrastructure writ large, which in Trump world means virtually anything. Remember, they counted the Keystone XL pipeline as part of their $1 trillion because they said, oh, well, we approved it and it's going to go forward. Probably, as much as we can tell, a small fraction of that $10 billion a year would go into transportation infrastructure. I mean, just look at one major project, the Gateway project in New York. That's about a quarter of what the federal share would need to be, or create in Chicago the largest freight bottleneck in the United States of America. That's an insignificant amount of money. We need a major federal commitment that is sustained, not a little bit of money. I mean, yeah, it's big money for 2 years. I mean, not big money. It's some additional money for 2 years. It's nowhere near what we need.
And it's predicated on cutting other transportation investments.
Right.
It's not a net gain.
well, any other questions about the subject that we're talking about here? Yes.
You talked a little bit about this on the green infrastructure part of it, but is there a role in, I'm just thinking in the way that Republicans got on board on this budget deal as part about the military stuff. Is there a role in playing up the national security implications to this? What does the Pentagon think about these issues, particularly on the green infrastructure stuff? Is this something that they're willing to put their chips down and say this is something we need?
The Defense Department has been in the forefront of it. They have any number of studies that they've analyzed. Our military leaders think that climate change is a national security threat, and they're looking at their facilities that are at risk. They want to invest in alternative energy because that protects their flexibility in the field. We spent billions of dollars in the Middle East transporting fossil fuels in trucks that might as well have just bullseyes on them. So the Department of Defense in Republican and Democratic administrations has been on top of it. What hasn't happened here is that the administration has not embraced the need and followed through on the opportunities.
Can I just mention one thing just to follow up on what Earl said? We on the Energy and Commerce Committee have been trying to have hearings on climate change, sea level rise. They won't do it, right? No hearings, no discussion of it whatsoever. So we had a minority hearing, which was our right, and I figured, well, let's go down to Annapolis, because I had heard that at the Naval Academy they were having major problems with sea level rise. I called up the superintendent. I told him this is a partisan hearing. There aren't going to be any Republicans. I fully expected he was going to say, no way, Congressman. He said, please come down, right? We went down there. He had the hearing in this room that could look out on where all the flooding was. It was not even a stormy day. It was a bright, beautiful day, and you could see all the flooding at Annapolis, and he testified because he is so concerned that this is affecting the military. So what Earl says is just the reality.
Yeah, and I would just add one thing. It was included in the National Defense Authorization Bill, recognition of the challenges that climate change presents to the military. So there is recognition of that, but there has to be a commitment to actually do something about that.
If I just may say, when I was Speaker, I established my flagship issue was climate and energy. Under President Bush's leadership, in a bipartisan way, we passed the biggest energy bill in the history of our country in 2007. He wanted nuclear, I wanted renewables. We came to agreement. At that time, this select committee that we established that Ed Markey chaired that was bipartisan, the Republicans were all in denial, but nonetheless it was a bipartisan committee, had many hearings and had documented for the record the testimony of generals and people in national security on this issue 2007, 2008, 2009. So this is not a new issue. The Department of Defense is one of the biggest users of energy in our government, in fact, probably in the world, right? And they have testified to use of renewals and all the rest in terms of cost, in addition to degradation of the environment with the alternative, with the strictly committed to fossil fuels. But this is what we're saying here is we can document what the Department of Defense is telling us in terms of not only rising sea levels, but what climate change would do in terms of drought, migration, all kinds of other issues that fuel the flame of discontent, of despair, and that provoke hostilities. But putting that aside for a moment, just to say there is no question that as we build for the future, we have to do so in a way that protects the environment, creates jobs, protects the environment, and keeps us safe. The safety of our infrastructure, the vitality of commerce, the quality of life, all of it is so important, and you cannot go into a multi-hundred-billion-dollar infrastructure plan without saying we have to do this with the enhanced knowledge that we have, with better opportunities that we know of to do so in a way that gets the best result for the American people. And by the way, cheaper, get more for your money. Going back to the budget, and I thank you for being on point here. Anybody else want to be on point and be complimented for it? No? Don't tell anybody I told you this. The only reason they put that infrastructure piece in there is, if you follow the conversation around here, is that they were hoping to get, what do they call themselves? Freedom Caucus? Whatever euphemism they're using for crush the little guy, was to get them to vote. Because if you heard them, they'd say, well, maybe if the domestic spending was on infrastructure. So you got the code word that they were going to have something on infrastructure. We have designated, I don't know how much of this is public yet, but how some of it will be spent is reflected in some of what you heard here about clean water, clean, safe drinking water, for example, issues about rural broadband, and some of the initiatives that we can do right up front. But what we're talking about here is a much bigger approach to it all. So that is not any reason to say, oh my gosh, you're on infrastructure. It was really a diversionary tactic. Because you know what? You know why they want to divert the attention of this agreement, which I fought very hard for many of the things that are in there, and I think that it's a good bill. It's unfortunate that it's taking place in an insulting way to those of us who are trying to protect the values of our country. But in this bill will cost a minimum, add to the debt, $250 billion, $250 billion added to the debt. They didn't mind having $1.5 trillion added to the debt, which would create no jobs. But they do resist any investments that do create jobs because they go under the category of domestic spending, which they are always against, very resistant to. So as they kept trying to get their votes by increasing the defense money, and we all believe in a strong national defense. We aren't fighting that number, but we were saying according to the budget agreement, we all have to rise together so there'd be parity in the increases. We won't ever reach the defense budget because they start at a higher place, but parity in the increases. That was successful. Many of our priorities are in the bill. I have an unease with it and hope that the Speaker will man up and decide that we in the House can also have what's Mitch McConnell guaranteed in the Senate, a vote on the floor. And but the fact is that that was just sort of like, so we can say to them, well, it's about infrastructure. It's not about infrastructure. It's about trying to get some votes from that caucus, and it's a much smaller piece of it than they wanted to do in the meantime, because we honored our commitments. Opioids, Congresswoman Estes been a champion. Opioids, veterans, National Institutes of Health, issues of higher education and child care. Separate from that, and the disaster assistance piece, which doesn't come under the caps, but nonetheless part of the negotiation. Issues that related to the health provisions, which again do not come under the cap, but are part of a different agenda because they're pay-fors for them. So it is. I'm pleased with the product. I'm not pleased with the process.
So you will vote for it?
No, I won't. We can't go 2 times. Or maybe we should reward you for being on point.
You're going to take back your compliment. What did your speech accomplish yesterday?
But I didn't go out there to be there 8 hours, but when I asked members for their statements from their dreamers, we were flooded with them. And what it accomplished was, it again reminded the American people what our commitment is to our values. This isn't about just the dreamers. It's about the United States of America and who we are as a country. And the response we had was so tremendous, and people will be calling in. As you can imagine, flooded with it all. And what it accomplished was to say, we have our beliefs and we're willing to fight for them, and we're willing to fight for them on the floor of the House. And we hope that it was a simple question to the Speaker. Why can't we have a vote in the House of Representatives? I think the intensity to have that vote has increased. If you considered that a hostile question, I considered a welcomed one, because you said you might take back the compliment. No, I thank you for it. Yes, ma'am.
Last question. Do you think there might be a need for a 24-hour CR or something like that?
Well, the bill is not finished yet, so, well, unless since we came in here, but as of last night. I'm sorry, I don't know what you're saying. We'll have text. Well, we didn't have text last night, and this morning when I was checking on some of the, I don't want to say unresolved, but unwritten down in the final form, that would probably just be now. So it just depends on how long the Senate decides to go forward, and if the Republicans have the votes.
Can you say what you want to hear from the Speaker exactly?
Yeah, I'll tell you exactly. Because you probably didn't, there was in with a lot of other stuff yesterday. Very specifically, it's the easiest thing that he could do. It's so easy, and we did it a number of times before. Bring everything to the floor. You want to bring Goodlatte to the floor? Bring Goodlatte to the floor. We want the Hurd-Aguilar bill brought to the floor. Bring that to the floor. The Senate has a proposal. Give the House a vote on that. Anybody else who has some, let everybody vote what they believe. I had big Queen of the Hill. Queen of the Hill means the bill that gets the most votes is the one that prevails. Whether that goes to, if it's, say, for example, the Senate bill would get the large number of votes, then it would go directly to the president. If it's a Hurd bill, then that goes to more of a conference situation. But the Hurd bill is bipartisan. It recognizes our responsibility to protect our borders, which we all agree, but how we do that and how much money we spend in this. But I get back to the point, this is about a small piece of the comprehensive immigration bill. This is like CHIP versus healthcare. Healthcare and how we address healthcare in our country is a bigger picture. CHIP is about just the children. Immigration, big issue. DREAM Act, just the children. So again, we can have something that is commensurate with the number of people who are protected in it as far as our border is concerned, and leave the rest for another day, but build confidence and make this a first step to going to the other place. So what we said to him, put everything on the floor, Queen of the Hill. Just to remind, when we did VAWA, you may recall we had 600 days. The Republicans would not bring a bill to the 600 days past the reauthorization date. 600 days, almost 2 years, overlapping 2 Congresses. And so what I suggested to the speaker, then Speaker Boehner, the Republicans had a bill. They loved it. Here's what it did. It said we're against violence against women unless you happen to be a Native American woman, an LGBT woman, or an immigrant woman, in which case you don't have the protections of this bill. What are we talking about? They consider that a Violence Against Women Act? Not so fast. Immigrants, Native Americans, and LGBT women? We had the bill that passed the Senate in a bipartisan way. We wanted that to be brought up on the floor. Finally, we said, Mr. Speaker, bring them back. Let the people who support this thing vote their alleged hearts out on how they want to curb protection for women, and let us have the vote on the Senate bill as well. We did that. The bipartisan Senate bill prevailed, went right to the president, and we did that. They could do the same thing now. It's easy. This is about one of the easiest things. Excuse me. This is about one of the easiest decisions the Speaker has to make. Let the House work its will. Some on their side are wanting a guarantee of a vote of Goodlatte. Give it to them. We want a guarantee of a vote on the issue. Let's have the debate, see where we go. But a bipartisan proposal is heard, and it is bipartisan, it is unifying, and it was done with great transparency. And if the Senate comes up with something that they want to send over here in a timely fashion, then let's consider that as well, see what that is, and consider that as well. So all we're saying is, Queen of the Hill, put it all out there, let the House work its will. But don't say to the House, we remove your dignity as your role in this important, an issue that is being discussed throughout the country, that has been discussed in the Senate of the United States, but cannot be discussed in a legislative framework on the floor of the House of Representatives. We just can't accept that. It has ramifications beyond this bill.
So are you lifting against the CAPS deal, or are you releasing your member?
Now, I'm just telling people why I'm voting the way I'm voting. Thank you.
Thank you.